Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Mr. Dundas, how are you this morning?
Very well. How are you, Ted?
I'm doing great. You and I have connected. I think we first talked about this, about your book and a proposal I pitched in your direction. I think I was actually on an airplane on my way to TLTF and on the Wi-Fi there, had the idea, sent you an email about potentially A, talking about the book itself, and then B, interviewing some folks in the book, because you guys covered a lot of KM and I related topics, which that's kind of our target audience. So, but before we get into all that, I would just want to give you a little bit of time to introduce yourself and kind of tell us what you're doing today and what you've done previously.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your show. I'm a listener. So thank you so much for that. So my story, very briefly, I started my career at Schulte, Roth & Zabel in 2005. I spent several years in the investment management practice there, practicing, launching funds and so on. And at a certain point, that practice needed something called knowledge management. I think at the time, all those involved with the creation of that role had only a vague notion of what was involved with knowledge management. I certainly had no idea what I was doing. And we learned together. And as is the case with so many people in this line of work, and that experience, as I'll mention as we continue the discussion, really informed what the goal of this book was. But anyway, to stick with my bio, I did that for several years. My role at Schulte Roth evolved over the years. By the time I left, I was overseeing two knowledge management attorneys, a team of researchers whom I co-managed with the great Donna Izzard. And then this opportunity that came in at Akin arose, and one thing led to another, and here I am at Akin Gump. I'm a member now of their investment management practice and building up their knowledge management team here, or their capabilities. I will say that the team here that was here for many years before I arrived has done really amazing things. So they brought me in to help just reinforce the team, provide a little more strategic direction, and really strengthen this function they have that's been here for a while and has been doing really fantastic things, as I've mentioned. So that's the overall background. And over the years, back to my experience of joining KM and having to figure out what it was. At that time, I picked up a handful of books, including Matt Parsons' book, Greta Russinow's book. I think there are a few others that I read trying to figure out how am I supposed to do this work. And since then, of course, Patrick Dundas has a great book on the topic. And I made a habit of periodically every few years going back and rereading the dog-eared pages, right, to see, okay, what have I gotten lazy about? What have I forgotten to do as a matter of my process I need to bring back in? But over the years, a thought occurred to me, and actually the thought occurred after volunteering for an ILTACon conference that required a significant amount of time to build. I don't know, Ted, if you've been involved with the ILTACon conference planning committees at all. But anyone who's done that, oh yeah, it is a remarkable organization in all kinds of ways. When it comes to the production of the annual conference, I'm not going to throw a number out there. Let's just say it was a significant number of hours that were required for every session, and that's why those sessions are so good. But I was I forget the exact title. I think it was a conference coordinator one year. And after the conference and putting all this effort, we all put on the show, and then the show was over, and we went out and had some cocktails, and then the next week we all went back to our lives, and things moved on. And of course, there are recordings, and some of those things that you build are retained and live on, but for the most part, it's ephemeral. And some of these sessions do people who are building the materials really put a lot of effort into building what is a distillation of kind of the basics of how to do certain aspects of the work. And the thought occurred to me, what if there was a similar process? What if there was a similar resource, only instead of the culmination of that effort resulting in a conference and some conference materials that, as I say, were somewhat ephemeral, the result is an iterative, memorialized work that articulates to our colleagues throughout the industry what are the best practices for doing this kind of knowledge and innovation work. And to make a long story short, well, maybe I'll tell some of that long story, but it took me probably a year, I think longer than a year, from when I had the idea and kind of mentioning to people in passing, do you think you'd be interested in this? Do you think people would want to read this? And a lot of people I just talked to at, networking events said, that sounds interesting. Let me know if you ever put it together. And then my work circumstances actually had, as I say, at Schulte Roth, they evolved fairly regularly. And I was, it was maybe a year before the pandemic started when I thought, oh, maybe this is like things are kind of lining up. Maybe I'll try and make the book happen. And then things changed and I got really busy. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't take on one more piece of anything. And then coincidentally, I got a call from PLI. I had a long-standing relationship with the editors there due to my work on a work that Schulte Roth publishes through PLI, and it was one of those very strange conversations that sometimes we have where they called and said, "Hey, we didn't really think of you as a CAM person because we thought of you as this private fund person, but we're thinking about building a knowledge management book, and we're looking at the contributors we know, and it turns out, looks like you know something about knowledge management." And I said, not only do I know something about knowledge management, but I have already thought a lot. For the past 2 years, I've been thinking about this book. I know exactly who should be contributing to it. I know exactly the scope of this thing and the goal. And I have a vision for not just this book, but the next 30 years of this book. And it was just so
serendipitous, maybe?
Yes, that's the word. Totally serendipitous and just remarkable. I remember when I got off the phone, it was a feeling of just shock and awe. Just how did this happen? Where I've been thinking about this for so long, and they were going to be my first call because there's something really amazing about the platform that PLI built. And as much as I guess I'm supposed to say I want everyone to go out and buy the hard copy, there's something very elegant and democratic about the fact that almost all the potential readers have already bought the book because they're working at firms who subscribe to the PLI platform. So the goal of the book is to get these ideas out there and put them in the hands of folks who need them, and not force them to pay $200 a copy for it, right? So the PLI platform is really it's really the perfect place for this work, I think.
When you say put the book in the hands, I mean, you mean that literally, like you need two hands for this book. And I and you and I talked about, I mean, this makes Atlas Shrug look like a Reader's Digest. It is thick, and I can't quite tell how many page numbers because they are organized. The page numbers are by chapter, but you've got, it looks like by my count, because I did a little bit of due diligence around this, you've got 22 chapters, you've got 46 authors. Does
Yeah,
that sound about right?
sounds about right. Yeah.
And how many pages did the book end up total?
Well, I remember when I was talking with PLI, they said you have a minimum page requirement. I think it was like 350 or 400 pages, and I said I don't think that'll be a problem because my outline was already 20 something pages or some 20 something chapters, and I knew that each chapter had the potential to be its own book, right? And then it just really grew from there.
Yeah,
I think the total page count is somewhere near 800.
And just so our listeners know, we've alluded to the book, and formally, let's kind of introduce those who aren't aware. I think most will be aware. You guys have done a great job promoting the book. I found out about it. I actually knew about it before Cam and I last year, but when you were up on stage talking about it and offered the 20% or whatever the discount code, early bird, I took a picture of it, and then when I came home, I ordered it and got it very soon thereafter. But the book that we're talking about is the Knowledge Management and Innovation Handbook. It's a manual for law firms and other legal services organizations by the Practicing Law Institute. This is what it looks like for those of you that are watching on YouTube. How do folks find the book who are interested in purchasing?
You can certainly go to the PLI website, and you can probably just Google it. I think it's on PLI. I think it's on Amazon. I think it's pretty easy to get to.
Good stuff. And so I have a ton of questions about the book itself. Again, I found the folks that you had, the contributor list is kind of the who's who in KM, and folks that I've been selling into this world for 15 years and speaking at conferences. And yeah, I'm not an ILTA conference volunteer, but I'm on the business partner committee just recently, actually. That is, so we're as InfoDash, we're big ILTA supporters, and it's just been a great organization for us as well. But yeah, so you've got 46 authors, 22 chapters, 800 pages. I can't imagine how long that took, which we're going to talk about. But before we do that, like, what was your inspiration? So you said you had thought about it, and was there a gap in the marketplace that you recognized as you were consuming this sort of content, and you saw an opportunity, or was it something else?
Yeah, was there a gap? It's hard to say there was a huge gap because, as I say, there are all these great books out there already. There are magazines, there are conferences. I guess to the extent there was a gap, what I saw was there was no kind of encyclopedia, if you will, for knowledge management. There was no one place you could go and put yourself in the shoes of someone who was a practicing lawyer who just made a career change and decided to move from practicing into knowledge management. And I have these conversations I'm not really all the time, literally, but very frequently with people who are moving from the practice side to the business side and have to understand how to do that work. And I found myself over and over again saying, look at these books, right? But then because each of those books is written by one author, they inherently have the limitation of that one author's perspective, and that one author's um, ability to generate the kind of volume, right? The only reason why this thing is 800 pages is because we have 46 people building it, right? The story I wanted to tell was a story that had to be told by a community and couldn't be told by one person. Um, and I wanted to be there to support, like I say, those people who make that career transition and trying to figure out what does this mean. And frankly, I would always say, if you're going to start anywhere, start with Patrick DiDomenico's book. It's the voice of that book is conversational. It's more readable than my book. It's a much better introduction to the discipline and the industry. But if you're starting to practice and you're starting to figure out, okay, I'm hearing these terms of art. What is experience management? What is document management? What is CRM? You hear all these acronyms that, for the first 2 years of practice, some people will be thinking, okay, what does API mean? And you can search the internet for it, but putting these concepts in the context of a law firm knowledge management function is very different, and there's not so much out there for that.
That's one thing I noticed straight out was you did not make any assumptions in the book in terms of the level of knowledge of the reader, and that was very helpful for me. Especially, I'm not a lawyer. There were things in here that I just didn't know. I mean, I'm just kind of flipping through here, talking about AFAs and all the different, terminology and ways you can structure those. And, Meredith's chapter about the definitions of knowledge and innovation, something I'm very interested in as a vendor, understanding the responsibilities of each, and things are a little all over the board in that particular department. But yeah, your book did not make assumptions, and that was very helpful for me as a vendor to gain an understanding, because many books do, and I think that's part of what made this so verbose is, you really kind of started at ground level, but it goes all the way to very advanced topics. And, like, again, I had Meredith on, we talked about her chapter, the best ways to go about structuring, from an organizational design perspective, knowledge and innovation team. So yeah, I assume that was very intentional.
Absolutely. The goal, and I think, as I've said to all the contributors so many times, this is version 1.0. I'm hoping we can be partners in this undertaking for the next 30 years. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing where it goes. I think it's a very strong 1.0, but ultimately each chapter, I think, does suffer from the fact that it is still, 1 or 2%. I've read every word and I've contributed to every chapter and edited every chapter. So, I think each chapter, with some exceptions, reflects the experience of the primary contributor and myself. And there are some chapters that have 5 or 6 contributors. But it's still our perspectives. The dream is that this will become almost like a Wikipedia for KM. And so, to the extent others out there in the community are listening to this, this is my message to you. We would be delighted if you read a chapter and thought, well, this is great, but it's missing X, Y, and Z. Instead of sitting there and saying, this chapter is incomplete, reach out to me, reach out to the primary contributor of that chapter. I would love for this to become a dialogue between those who are involved in the production of this book and the broader community, so that we can start to really cover the entire breadth of what we do. And this can really be the go-to resource for how to do the work.
Well, I'm going to make a pitch to you based on that. So I went through, and again, I put all your chapters in a spreadsheet along with the authors. You have seven authors or contributors in the research services chapter. You have one in collaboration, which is my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
InfoDash is a intranet extranet platform, and we enable law firms to collaborate both internally and externally with their clients. And Sarah Miro did a great job in the. She was it looks like the sole contributor in that space. Yeah, I would love to share some thoughts on potentially expanding that. But um, how how did you go about deciding, or did you decide, or did the
Hmm.
contributors decide, hey, we're going to have 7 for this one for that one, 4 for the other one? What did that process look like?
Yeah. So the first thing I did was come up with the rough outline. And then for each chapter, I made a short list of possible contributors who, based on my experience, the people who I knew, the people who I saw um, put their put their voice out into the community through participation in networking groups or conferences like ILTACon, art conferences, and so on. People who had opinions and weren't afraid to voice them, right? Um, and also those who had, you know, experience in different areas. Uh, so made those short lists of those folks, and then just started emailing. I'd wake up early Saturday morning and just start emailing people, um, introducing them to the concept. I usually would start with a phone call, and sometimes those conversations ended quickly. Sometimes they said, "This is a great idea. I'd love to be a part of it, but I can't because fill in the blank. I don't have the bandwidth. I I have other commitments. Some were retiring soon. Some retired during the course of writing the book. This project went on for about 3 years, so all kinds of life events happened to different people, and some people wrote components of a chapter and had to bail. Some people um, weren't able to commit it and then had to uncommit because of life circumstances. It was just all over the map. So in terms of how things settled out, my basically I would select a primary contributor for each chapter, and then I said, if you think there's someone else who will be able to be helpful in building this, give them a call, introduce them. We'll get them on board too. And so some chapters evolved to the point where we had, as you say, like 6 or 7 different contributors. And if it were up to me, I would have had 10 contributors on each chapter, right? But just practically speaking, getting the voice to be consistent and the rest of it, that was easier to do with fewer contributors. But it also helped that I was reading everything, and I hope I didn't make any enemies because I rewrote a lot to try to get the voice to be somewhat consistent, and people generally said they were appreciative. I hope that was sincere.
Yeah. Well, so I didn't go to law school. I went to business school, and the MBA programs are notorious for kind of peer-to-peer projects, and
Yeah,
there were a lot. I'm going back a long time, but in my earlier in my career, that was something I didn't love it, to be candid. I don't like when things are outside of my control that
sure.
have a huge impact on me, right? The grade we end up getting is dependent upon A, people delivering on their commitments, and B, the quality of that output. And then if you're leading the project, you have to kind of stitch all that together and make sure that it's coherent in a consistent voice. What sort of time commitments were involved in putting this project together?
Um, you know, I want to say I put in about 300 hours. That's my bet. Um, I couldn't say what the other contributors put in, but it's a lot. Depending on your chapter, we have some chapters that are 10, 15 pages, and we have some chapters. I haven't looked along at maybe the longest chapter maybe in the neighborhood of 50 or 60 pages. I mean, there are some really big efforts that went into this. And the original hope, certainly PLI's hope, was that they'd have this on the shelves within 12 months, and ended up taking 3 years. Um, I use the pandemic as an excuse, but I'm not sure that's really fair. I think with something as big as this, I think it was inevitable that it was going to take this long.
Yeah. What was so? And this is a side gig, right? I mean, this isn't your day job.
Yeah.
You and I met back in your SRZ days, and I know you had a lot on your plate. We were talking to you and Trish about intranet related stuff, but I remember scheduling and getting things on calendars. I think we ended up actually meeting at ILTA in DC in person
Yeah.
because we couldn't get calendars aligned. But what was the motivation for this? I assume it wasn't financial. I mean, was this like what motivated you to put in 300 hours worth of time?
I don't know. I don't know. It wasn't financial, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It was I don't know. I think that a lot of people in KM, myself included, have an instinctual need to organize things. And I think that this is a manifestation of that instinct, where I just felt like there's all this great information out there. There's all this great content, but it's disparate. It's not connected coherently. And could we bring a team of people together to make, as I say, an authoritative reference work? And anyone who reads this will see very quickly the voice is very different from other books out there. It really, and I don't know if we nail it 100% of the time, but I think we get close to achieving a voice of it's not first person. It's not, here are case studies. It's, so you want to do X, or actually, I'll rewind that, because we tried very hard to not use the first person. So the voice is more like, when building a precedent database, there are 3 ways to go about doing this. And then the chapter unfolds, right? 3 different ways, and then subways and subways and so on. And tried to be logical and meticulous about going down as many narrow paths as we can to describe exactly how to get different work done. And in some cases we get very granular. In some other cases, maybe we are more on the surface. But that's the goal. I think that's the difference between this work and other works. And the motivation is just some people are crazy. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, I mean it reads like a textbook to me, and it's like you said, this isn't a book that you read cover to cover. It's
I hope no one, if you read this cover to cover, there's something wrong with you. It's intended to be a reference work. There are a couple of chapters that you could read cover to cover, but you wouldn't want to read the whole book. It's intended to say, okay, I have this project coming up. And as I think a lot of people in the knowledge management space, we all have different experience based on the needs of our different organizations. Some organizations have gone deep on enterprise search. Some haven't touched it. Some never will. Some will go deep into precedent databases or forms. Others won't. But anytime you get to that kind of project, the first time you do it, you're going to have to think, well, how do I start this, right? And that the hope is that this will be a resource for people in those positions and those roles.
Yeah. So your chapter that it looks like wrote or contributed to solely was around kind of form development and maintenance, and that's one of the use cases in which InfoDash accommodates. And you must have had some internet related responsibilities while you were at SRZ, because that's how you and I met. What sort of, we see a lot of our customers now deploying these forms libraries through our product, which is SharePoint underneath the hood. InfoDash is kind of a layer on top of not kind of, it's a layer on top of SharePoint Online, and we reach into just about every back office legal system there is and allow firms to build experiences, and those are essentially to accommodate use cases, and forms libraries is one of the more popular use cases that we see addressed in the platform. In your travels, has SharePoint kind of been the go-to place in which those sorts of forms library solutions have been deployed?
As you may anticipate, and as you'll read in the book, there are several different ways to do this. And maybe to go into this deeper would require a second podcast, but I'll give you the basics.
Sure.
I think there are, when it comes to environments through which end users will gain access to form collections, there are a few different avenues. So one is to post documents to an intranet, whether it be SharePoint or some other environment, right? And that content is hosted on that environment, in that online environment. The other dominant approach is the document management system is the repository of record for all these things, and they are surfaced through intranets, but they don't sit. They're not saved. They're not, well, it's hard to say. It's not a hard copy, but you know what I'm saying. Where are the files physically sitting? Where are the zeros and ones physically sitting? They are physically sitting in the document management system. And there are pros and cons to both approaches. The pro to having the content sitting in that SharePoint environment is the content is indexed for search in SharePoint. So if you're searching in SharePoint, you get those results. The downside, though, is typically you are developing forms in the DMS, and so then you have sort of a development environment and a live environment, development environment being the DMS and the live environment being the intranet. Versus if you have the content solely residing in the DMS as the repository of record and surfacing it on the intranet, typically that content wouldn't be indexed for search in the same way. So you wouldn't really be able to search that intranet and find the forms. You'd be able to search the DMS, sometimes through the intranet, depending on how you've configured your search. But yeah, so there are a couple of different ways to do that. And there are other ways, right? You can have documents for firms or other organizations that have not made the investment in an intranet. I think a lot of in-house departments probably wouldn't have made that investment, and they probably wouldn't have made the investment in document management system. They'll just have Windows OS folders or Google Drive folders, right? And have to figure out, okay, if it grows organically, often you end up with a bunch of documents that are not organized, that are commingled with other kinds of documents. They're not named well. The rest of it becomes a mess, right? So to sum it up, I would say you basically have three different options. You have an intranet-based repository, a DMS-based repository, or a kind of native local drive or network drive-based repository. And then the challenge is, okay, well, then how do you organize these things in different repositories through document naming or other kinds of metadata to help people gain access? It's fun. It's fun to do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and this brings up something that I've been thinking a lot about, which is AI in
Yeah.
in legal. So there's a very specific reason why storing documents in a DMS is mandatory at law firms. And, the matter of managing ethical wall boundaries
Hmm.
is high on that list, right? With forms, you don't have that constraint, right? These are
Yeah.
genericized in a way that allows you to have some choices around that. I have been thinking about specifically like with Copilot, where Copilot fits in the law firm context. And one big drawback for deploying Copilot on practice of law use cases
Hmm.
is where the documents reside, because that's the value, right? Copilot brings together all of your emails, your chats, your documents that you have stored in OneDrive or SharePoint or Teams. But law firms have very few documents stored in Teams or SharePoint, with the exception of things like forms that don't have strict ethical wall boundaries around them. And, I have kind of come to the conclusion that until we figure out how to deal with that, tools like Copilot are going to be much more useful in the business of law than the practice of law, right? Without using bridges, right? You can
Yeah.
upload retrieval augmented generation. You can upload documents into Copilot and other Gen AI tools and interact with them. But I'll tell you, just from personal experiences, it's somewhat it's not perfect. Just this morning, I'm doing a little experiment. I've seen this rise of innovation. We actually had
Hmm.
a podcast with Patrick Domenico and David Ruff on it. I want some data around it. So I've been taking the ILTA roster, and I've got data all the way back to 2014 that I've been saving, dump it in ChatGPT and say, how many job titles have the word innovation in them? Well,
Hmm.
that's a pretty straightforward thing to do, right? Like I can do it myself manually with uploaded in Access or SQL or just probably even
Yeah.
in Excel. You know what? GPT has really kind of choked on it a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, first it was the file format. It was in, it's a 10-year-old file. So it was in Excel 97 format, converted it to
Hmm.
CSV, uploaded that, came back with a result that just wasn't right. So yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts? This is a little bit going off script here, but I'm curious your
Sure.
thoughts on where you see the best. Do you see different um, practice of law versus business of law and Gen AI tools, and one being a better fit than another?
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think it's likely that in the near term, and I guess I'll say everything I'm about to say is probably near term, right?
Yeah.
Because long term, who knows where this is going? But I think you're right. I think in the near term, the business side is going to get more value out of these large language model AIs, generative AIs, than practice. But I think the exception there would be it depends on the practice, depends on the very specific use case. So, for example, ChatGPT and other AIs like it are actually pretty good at drafting very short legal provisions, definitions. Um, you know, I don't know that I would trust it to draft an exculpation provision, but I might ask it to draft a definition of X, whatever you want to fill the blank in with, right? And I think there are some products. I haven't looked at some of these drafting assistants recently, but I would expect that they would be starting to build in that kind of functionality if they haven't had it for a while already. Um, for practice, when it comes to going back to forms, right? The thing that I think a lot of people are hoping generative AI will be able to do is write that first version of a draft so that firms don't need to continue to maintain form banks or precedent banks. The AI will just figure it out. I don't think we're there yet in the near term. I think it will really struggle. I think, and I'm not an expert in AI, but my understanding is that some of these have page limitations on the kinds of documents they can ingest and the kinds of documents they can create. And there's a fair number of very commonly prepared documents that run into the hundreds of pages. Also, there's a lot of interdependence among documents in certain practices. For example, in the investment management practice, funds practices, you'll have fund documents that are very interdependent and have what should be nearly identical provisions. And if there's a hallucination between the expense section in a disclosure document versus an expense section in an investment management agreement or a limited partnership agreement, or the list keeps going, right? That is a malpractice claim, right? So I think there'll be some very narrow use cases for AI when it comes to drafting for now. But who knows what this landscape looks like in 10 years.
Yeah, these are all short-term challenges. There will be a fix. There has to be, to the silo situation that we have today. Some people think, I completely disagree, but some people think that SharePoint may end up being a DMS one day for law firms. And I think there are a lot of challenges with that today. I've had the debate on the show.
Yeah.
Davis and I dug into that.
The providers who are focused exclusively on document management, they struggle enough already. It'd be really hard to believe that Microsoft could bring something to market that would have functionality superior to the existing vendors.
Yeah, not just I think the feature capability gap could be bridged, but the support model, if the DMS goes down, like, your law firm grinds to a halt.
Yeah.
And even the biggest law firms in the world, like the K&Es of the world, they are small potato. They're not even in the Fortune 500 revenue range, right? Just outside of it, the biggest law firms. Getting Microsoft's attention is not easy for law firms, and getting somebody on the phone to make something happen, good luck. I used to work at Microsoft support 25 years ago, and I'm familiar with all the different levels of support that you can get, and Microsoft will sell you on platinum or premier support. Well, look, at the end of the day, you're talking to somebody like me that's on a phone, and even I have limited access in the support function to the product team. They keep very strict firewalls around those resources, and wisely so. But yeah, I see the support model as being the Achilles heel that Microsoft will never get there, and I don't think they want to get there, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think the needs of a law firm, as you mentioned before, the version control needs, the access control needs of a law firm are very different from other kinds of businesses.
How do you manage walls in an environment like that wasn't really built with that in mind? It would not be easy.
No. It's hard with purpose-built technologies, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know there are some, I'm not going to say any names. There's some big vendors that have this thought in their head. One in particular that I know of, who I've had conversations with, and I've made my case. I don't know where things landed with that, but there's some smaller vendors. I think in the small law space, and when I say small, I mean really small. Good friend of mine here in St. Louis owns a 50 attorney law firm, and they were using Epona and SharePoint, and once they got over 30 attorneys or so, they just kind of started to struggle with it, move to NetDocs, and it's a better fit. So, in the small and solo practitioner space, I could see it. It already has some install base there, but for AmLaw, ain't going to happen. That's my thinking on it. In fact, I got a bet with Joe Davis. He wrote an article on pontificating on where teams specifically, which is mostly SharePoint underneath the hood, will be 2025. And we have a bet that if there's one AmLaw firm, that uses SharePoint as a primary DMS, I have to buy him a steak dinner at ILTA 2025. Otherwise, he's buying my dinner, and I think I'm pretty safe. I think I'm going to be eating a free steak next August.
Be on that side of the bet for sure.
Yeah. Well, this is we're running out of time here. This has been a really good conversation. I think so. Kind of next steps for you and I
sure.
is, I'm very interested in getting the folks your collaborators on this project on the podcast and talking about all the great information. I mean, there really is. I don't get a commission on your books. I have no incentive here other than, getting quality guests on the show and talking about interesting stuff. It really is a great resource. And, congratulations on pulling this off, man, because this couldn't have been easy.
It was definitely not easy, but it was a joy to do. I got to work with some old friends and make some new ones. And I like to write, I like to edit, and I like to organize thoughts about what we all do in this community. And this is my way of giving back to this community. And I think I, like so many people, when I got out of law school, wasn't quite sure how the next 30 years were going to unfold. And if you told me this is where my life would go, I wouldn't have believed you. But I really, I owe my professional life to this community. And so this is my way of saying thank you.
That's awesome. Well, we look forward to your next edition, and when you're starting to plan that out, let's talk about collaboration. And maybe we'll get on and have another episode and maybe dive a little deeper into that whole concept with forms libraries and how to deploy them. And I think that would be interesting, especially for our customer base. So we'll
Absolutely,
have to,
I'd love to.
Yeah, get something on the calendar. Well, good stuff. Listen, I appreciate your time. This has been great, and I look forward to working with you in the coming weeks and months on getting your contributors on the show.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.